Hello guys and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach mates. Tonight it is just Jonas. Unfortunately Thomas is out on domestic duties. So the fantasy slides that Thomas kindly prepares for us are not going to be here tonight. So we're going to use our trusty friend at FanFooty. And yeah, we're just going to get straight into it. So just let me pull up FanFooty. So the first player I want to ask you about, Jonas, is Travis Boak. So he's got 149 on the weekend. Obviously has shown, at least in the first, 8 rounds, that he's looking like being a top 8 midfielder. What do you think about him for the rest of the year going forward?
Going forward, I probably think he's a pass, given he's almost 590k.
Here we go.
And at that sort of price, I think you want to be picking players aren't going to fall away in average. And we saw last year a bit of regression in both scoring. Whilst he's been great and he's a superstar of the game, at his age, I'd rather be picking someone who's maybe 4 or 5 years younger, who's entering their prime rather than leaving it. So for me, he's a pass, but good job if you started him.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of the same here. And speaking of Port Adelaide, what on earth is going on with Zach Butters? This guy touted the year as being a top 6, top 8 forward, and he's just fallen in a heap. I think his mate Sam Powell-Pepper has literally destroyed him for everyone. So what do you think about Butters going forward? And perhaps are you looking to actually trade him, which I know some players have actually done that. I think he's number 3 most traded out player so far this week. What are you doing with Butters?
I can't blame the players who are trading him out because his scoring the past 6 or so weeks has been nothing short
Horrendous.
Pathetic. Yeah.
Horrendous. Sam,
the only thing that's
keeping
keeping me interested in the pick at the moment is the fact that he plays North Melbourne this week. So I want to give him ideally one more chance, and if he doesn't score well, it's a good sign that he's not going to be a premium moving forward this year. So he's one where you can trade him out if it facilitates a nice upgrade, but I want to give him one last chance because he does have that high ceiling and can potentially be top 6 forward, but I'm not too sure. What are your thoughts on Butters?
I think he's a luxury to get rid of at this stage. I think if you've got 6 finished forwards, I think you can get rid of him. But I think while you still got rookies on the field, I think he's just going to have to be on the back burner. I think he's in a bit of a Whitfield position for me, where I want to get rid of him, but I've just got other priorities.
Would you be
but
trading him? Would you be trading him ahead of, say, a Cornelio or some of the other rookies on our fields, like a Nick Martin or something? Because at the moment they're scoring arguably more consistent and better than Butters. So would you be more confident fielding a Nick Martin or a Zach Butters moving forward?
Well, I think at this stage you'd have to say Nick Martin, which is unbelievable given the fact he wasn't on the list in January. And now he's just about being Essendon's best player this season in what's been a sort of really bad start for Essendon. But yeah, I mean, these Cornelios, Brodies, and Martins, they're all scoring, 70s, 80s pretty much every week now, whereas Zach Butters is lucky to get 70 most weeks. So yeah, I think he's probably someone who you're just going to have to keep, but he's definitely been frustrating. I feel like he's a bit like what Isaac Heaney used to be like, where Heaney sometimes used to do this, where he'd be made out as a breakout player and then he'd just do this. So it's frustrating, definitely frustrating. Going over the other side now, so Jack Macrae, 144 points. I don't know how he got 144 points because I think he was on about 70 off 8 disposals at one stage, which was bizarre. Do you just have to get Jack Macrae given his scoring potential?
I think with the amount of good mids that have fallen in price with Petrarca, Brayshaw, even Took Mills at at a lucrative price. I think you can wait on McRae if you don't have him. His break-even's still going to be pretty high this week. And I think he's one I'd probably target after the bye, given the fact that there's so many other good trade-in targets at the moment. And if you're bringing him in at, I think he's 640k.
Yeah,
you're sort of
630.
Yeah, you're going to be occupying a lot of bank to get him in, which could hinder your ability to bring in some other players. And it could also mean that you're trading in a 102k speculative rookie over a 123k rookie who has a bit more job security. So I think you can certainly wait on McRae. Those poor scores are still in his break-even cycle, so he's not going to rocket out of reach for the next at least week to 2 weeks. So I'd be waiting.
Yeah, his break-even's 135, so I think even like a 150 score, he's only going to probably go up 4 or 5k.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think probably wait on McRae one more week. What about Robbie Mccomb, who was on the bubble last week at 102,000? He scored 73 SuperCoach points off 16 disposals. Did you pick him up? And I guess well done to those of us who picked him up, because I think he's probably got a spot now in that dog side, given the fact that they've lost some players.
Yeah, exactly. He's been a good pickup, partly because of the fact that some Bulldogs players like Waitman and O'Brien, Vandermeer, Bontempelli, also under an injury cloud. So he should have some decent job security in the short run. I didn't pick him because I was a bit uncertain on his role in terms of whether he can get consistent games, given the fact that the Bulldogs are a pretty strong outfit and his disposal efficiency was pretty ordinary, but he did well. I went with the route with Carroll, who I think should hold again. So I'm not too disappointed. But yeah, if I had my time again, I would have liked to have saved the 20k. But I think Carroll passed the eye test a lot more than Mccomb. And even though I went early on him, I think he's going to hold his spot. So I'm not too fast.
Yeah, I think so too. So we'll move on to the other game. So Sean Darcy, who scored 178 points. Actually, Gold State got 142, so it was a bit of a ruck fiesta over there. But what do we think about Sean Darcy? Obviously, very injury prone, but when he plays, he just seems to always score. I think I had a look on here. I think he's actually like a top 3 player for points per minute this season. On SuperCoach. Yeah, in fact, he's second behind. Only Darcy McFerden's ahead of him. So when he plays, he scores. If, say, a Gorn or someone goes down, are you going to lean towards... Would you lean towards him, or would you be more inclined to go for someone a bit safer?
I think if you don't have Gorn or Wits, he's a very good option because you need a bit of cover. You don't want to be fielding Hayes. And if you're going for Gorn, who's a bit under an injury cloud, I'd be a bit hesitant and skeptical. But I think with Darcy, he's had a few niggles, and sure, that's going to be a risk, but his scoring power is so huge that he just needs to score 130 for the next 5 weeks or so, which he can easily do to be a successful trade-in. And with the 75 break-even, I think he's reclaimed that position in the ruck. He was hovering in the forward line in the earlier rounds, but he had a huge chunk of time in the ruck line, and I think in 2 weeks he comes up against Darcy Cameron. So I want to be an owner of Sean Darcy when that happens. So I'm just going to jump on this week because he looks back to his old form. And he's one of those ruckmen where the Freo players actually trust him with ball in hand. You look at like Pitternet and some other ruckmen who get, like Sam Hayes, for instance, they get bypassed at all opportunity because they're not very reliable by foot. Whereas Darcy, he's a good kick, he's a good mark, and he's relatively mobile. So I'm pretty happy to get him in, and hopefully he doesn't get injured. If he does, at least you have the security of a Hayes at R3, for instance, in the short term. So I endorse the move.
What about Andrew Brayshaw? Obviously, 134. I guess we could talk about maybe Monday as well in this. So, and obviously the impact that Fife's going to have when he comes back in. So we'll probably mainly talk about Brayshaw, given that he's probably more super coach relevant. But 134 points. Currently I think he's number 8th ranked midfielder this year. Sixth ranked midfielder. Can he keep this up? And what impact does Fife have on his scoring, if any at all?
I definitely think he can keep this up. He's been tagged a bit, but shown the ability to pull a 90 score when that attention's come to him. So I'm not too afraid about that. And the fact that he's 570k, it's a pretty nice price point. You can wait another week on him, but I'm happy to bring him in this week because he's got a favourable buy. He's, as you said, the 6th rated midfielder, and at 570k, that's a bit of a steal. So I think with Fife coming back, that might take some attention away from Brayshaw, which is obviously a benefit. And it's just going to help the whole team in general, and might provide Brayshaw with an extra goal assist or an easier touch when Fife, for instance, feeds it out to him. So I'm not too concerned about his scoring when Fife returns. The only real issue is his game time. It still seems to be lingering in the 70s. Ideally, that goes up a bit, but I think you're getting a pretty good deal if you're paying $570 for him, because he's relatively durable and he's got another year under his belt and looks to be scoring quite well. So, yeah.
Well, I think the case with him, as long as Sean Darcy stayed in that side, I think he's going to keep scoring, because I think he's probably just about their number one, like, pure midfield player. So I think the Ruckman Darcy is probably going to try and look for him a lot. So yeah, I think as long as Darcy can stay fit, I think Brayshaw is going to be a good pick. What are you doing with Nathan O'Driscoll, who's 61 on the weekend? I think his break even now is about 55, I think, off the top of my head. What are you considering doing with O'Driscoll, given he's made 172,000, which is very good, but has his time come up in your side?
Maybe. I'm still weighing that up because he has half decent job security and the DPP. The 55 break even's certainly achievable, but he seems to be falling away a bit. He needs a goal or two to manage a 60+ score, which doesn't fill me with a heap of optimism. So it's definitely someone you can look to trade out, but he could also be a good player to hold during the buys because he should continue to get games in the short term.
Yeah, I think so too. Obviously, I don't think there's anyone from North Melbourne worthwhile talking about. So we'll move on to Richmond v Collingwood. Now, I don't know about you, but I was actually at this game, so I saw Tom Lynch just tear Collingwood apart. 184 SuperCoach points, which I think backs up. I think last week he had like 155. I think his break even this week for someone who's at his price, so he's 491. His break even's -64. Would it be crazy to bring him into your sides this week?
Yeah, it would be. You don't look at bringing in 500k full forwards. It's ludicrous. He's going to pull a 60 or a 50 in the next few weeks and completely ruin your season. So no, don't look at it.
Yeah,
and on the topic of Richmond, one other forward who did impress me was Rioli Jr.
Yes.
What do you think about him? Is he a good trade-in target?
Well, I had a look. So he had less disposals than Carroll. So this is doing a bit of a comparison here. So he only had 14 disposals, but it's what he does with the ball that just makes him such a valuable pick. Like, he had like five inside 50s. I think he had 2 direct goal assists, both to Tom Lynch. He had 2 chase down tackles in the Richmond forward 50. So I mean, I think he's going to keep getting games in that Richmond side, because I think they probably need someone like him at the feet of Lynch and Riewoldt. and I think he provides a great deal of energy for them. So, yeah, I think I was really impressed by him. Obviously, it's a little bit concerning the 14 disposals, but if he can keep scoring 72 off that, I think he's going to be a must-have. And also, the other thing I like about him too is he's got that midfield forward eligibility. So if you bring him into your sides in the midfield, if you've got a forward line, say, full of midfield forwards like I do, you can always flick him into the forward line and then flick him back in the midfield later on. So I think there's a lot of upside, and I think his break even this week's like minus 82 or something. So he's probably going to make 70k this week. So yeah, I think he's a good buy. But what about Dustin Martin? Obviously, first game back since round one. Little bit quiet, 83. But he did get going in the last quarter. Would you possibly consider bringing him in at some stage later in the season, giving his scoring potential and the fact that he's probably going to have to sort of play like he did in that 2017 season when he pretty much was the best player throughout the season, just for Richmond to probably make the finals. What do you think about Dustin Martin as a sort of a trading? Maybe not now, but maybe sort of around his buy. What do you think about that?
The back end of last year, actually ever since like round 4 of 2021, he's been a disappointing pick. So unless I'm seeing like 80-70% mid-time and scores of 100 plus, I won't be going near him because he's prone to spending a lot of time up forward and then relying on moments of brilliance, which he does do. But yeah, I don't see him being top 6, so I wouldn't be going there.
Yeah, and I think it's going to Collingwood. So Jack Crisp and Scott Pendlebury, who are obviously midfielders, defender midfielders. Obviously we'd probably be picking them in the back line given their defensive eligibility. Can you have both of these guys? Obviously, I think we've both got Jack Crisp, and I've been flagging out Scott Pendlebury now as a potential buy pretty much since he got that defensive eligibility. What do you think about both of those two?
I think Crisp is a safe, reliable option. He got flamed a bit at the start of the year, but he's restored at least some people's faith. Yeah, I like Jack Crisp a lot more than Pendlebury as an option because he's a bit younger. He's got no problems with durability, and he's getting a heap of midfield time. So I think that's a big tick. As for Pendlebury, I don't hate the option either. It's just I'm not too sure he's top 6 because Crisp is ahead of him. You've obviously got Stewart. You've got, what else is there? Short having a mind blank. Sicily, those 4. Yep. Then and there are a few others. Jack Sinclair, Dougherty. And so I don't think Pendlebury is even top 10, to be honest. So I think he's one who's 550k-ish.
Yeah, just under.
You can pretty much pick Jack Sinclair at the same price, who's got a slightly worse buy, but I'd be rather going that direction than Pendlebury because Pendlebury's getting a bit older. We could rest him towards the back end of the year for a week or two. So he's one where I wouldn't be playing around. There's so many good defense options. Pick a Sicily, a Dougherty, a Dawson, whatever floats your boat, because they're going to be scoring similar. And at least with Sicily and Dawson, no injury concerns. You could maybe say that for Dougherty as well, but I'm still a bit hesitant on Dougherty given his lack of preseason.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
It's scoring well.
Yeah, it's been scoring well, yeah. So Scott Pendlebury right now is currently number 6 in the back line.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that surprises you, but if you go off averages, he falls down to 11. So, yeah, I guess that's probably your point there. What about Nick Dacos? Have you still got him? And if so, what are you planning on doing with him for the next sort of few weeks?
I tried him last week actually to get in some of the players I picked, like Luke Parker. I think he's still a fine hold. I just got rid of him because he'd made me enough money and there were question marks with his health.
Fitness.
Yeah. So I think he's one where you can ideally hold, but if it opens the door to get a premium you really like Brayshaw, for instance, then I'd have no hesitation trading him because he is basically 390k and I don't see him really rising too much more. You might, if you wait a few more weeks, get a bit more money, but the main purpose in holding him would be solid scoring over the buys. So see if that is your intention, and if there's another avenue, say for instance getting rid of O'Driscoll, and you can still facilitate getting in a premium that you like, I'd be going and trading O'Driscoll first, but I wouldn't be too concerned if you're forced to trade Dacos either, because in the end you're getting a premium who will probably be outscoring him by 30 points each week anyway.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good call. I mean, personally, I've still got him, and I think he's going to probably be someone who potentially I'll look at getting rid of around the Collingwood bye, which I think is round 14, I think round 13 or 14. It's after the Queen's birthday anyway. So moving on to the Sydney game, the Sydney Gold Coast game. Obviously a bit of an upset here with Gold Coast winning here. I just want to touch on real quick about Luke Parker. So I think you jumped on him last week. He only got 89, which is, I guess, the knock on him in that he can be a bit up and down with his scoring. Are you sort of happy that you got Parker in, given that he's a bit of a yo-yo with his scoring? Or do you think you or other people might be a bit concerned about that? Or did you even get him in knowing that he might be a bit up and down with his scoring?
Yeah. Well, when I look at a player's score, like for instance Parker, I don't get too concerned given Sydney's top two players or scorers for the week were defenders, and Parker still was the fifth highest scorer for Sydney. Apparently he rolled his ankle a bit, and Sydney were well held to a strong Gold Coast team. So I think I'm not too fussed. I still think he will be a top 6 forward, playing a fair chunk of midfield time. And you look at Callum Mills, for example, who scored 60, and Heaney, who scored 75. So clearly players who share a similar sort of role to Parker were also well down. And if you just take a look back a few weeks ago with Brodie and Brayshaw in the Geelong game, they both scored pretty ordinary, but that's just a product of how the game was played because the mids just didn't do as well. So I think it's the same case here, and I wouldn't be surprised if Parker has a big bounce back game this week.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on what I was going to ask you about Heaney and Callum Mills. I think they're in the same boat.
If you don't own Heaney or Mills, you can wait on their price drop, but I still think if you want Parker, this is the week to get him.
Yep, I would go along with that. I think you can definitely wait on Mills. I think his break-even this week's 214, so 201. There we go.
Yeah.
So he's going to probably plummet in price, and I think even a decent score, like even if he scores 129, his break-even next week's going to be 193. So I think there's probably wait on Mills now. Moving over to the Gold Coast Suns. What about Touk Miller? This guy just keeps getting the job done. Another 122. Just so consistent with his scoring. What if you were tossing up, say, between a Boak and a Brayshaw, which someone in this podcast might be? Which way would you lean towards out of, say, a Miller and perhaps a Boak and we'll say Brayshaw? Which way would you lean towards?
I'd have Brayshaw and Miller at the top, depending on your buy structure. And if you have less premiums playing in round 14, over round 13, I'd be picking Brayshaw. And if I'd be picking Miller if it's the other way around. Say you're indifferent between the buys, I'd probably be picking Miller. but that extra 35k that you save on getting Brayshaw could be really helpful. But if you put them head to head, I think on total scores for the end of the year, I'd expect to see Miller 1, Brayshaw 2, both 3.
Yep. I'd probably go along with that too. What about Matt Rowell? So 88 on the weekend. He's sort of actually come good for those of us who've kept him the last couple of weeks. What are you thinking about doing with Rowell if you've still got him?
I think he's shown now to be probably a low 90s average player from here on. And I think he's a pretty good on-field option. But as you can see to that Dream Team SuperCoach ratio, he only had 16 touches, 58 in Dream Team. So there's one where he's a bit reliant on those contested possessions, and that sort of scares me because if the game's not too heavily contested, he could pull out a 60. So he's one where I'd be looking to trade if you have the luxury to. Would I be trading him over a Butters? Probably not, given the fact that Butters has been so poor recently. I'd be looking at trading a Butters and a Cornelio first and foremost, just given their roles and their form in the past month or so. You got to reward Rowell's form and hold him. But say you don't have those issues or you're hell-bent on keeping Cogs and Butters, then yeah, Rowell's one that you can certainly look at moving on given the price he's at. He's made you a bit of money, so it's not the worst trade out.
What about Malcolm Roses? I only scored 18 on the weekend. I think this guy's burnt a lot of players. He's only gone up 65k. His break-even's already 50. I'm so glad that I dodged this bullet because I was that close to bringing him in and I decided against it. And I'm happy I waited because I think Maurice Rioli's probably going to pass him this week given how badly he's been scoring. What would you do with Roses if you had him? Have you just got to keep him and hope that he comes good, or is he someone who you could look at, say, just conceding and bringing in a Rioli just to get money?
He hasn't made enough money to trade out. If he's dropped, then he's a good loophole, and if he plays, then that's fine. He's doing a job for you. So I think he's one you just hold on to because with the rookies you're picking now, ideally you want them just to be playing over the buys, and Roses probably has the capacity to if he holds his spot this week and kicks a few goals. So I think, yeah, I wouldn't be trading him because he's under 200k and it's a bit of a waste of a trade. You're not making that much money.
Yeah, I think so. So moving on to the Giants and the Geelong game, one player I want to talk to you about is Isaac Cumming. Scored 128 on the weekend, which was very, very impressive. I think he's basically destroyed Lockheed Whitfield off the half-back line. He's currently the 8th highest ranked defender. If we go off averages, obviously he's missed a game. Is this guy someone who can have top 6 merit later on in the year? And if Whitfield comes good, can you have both Cumming and Whitfield in your side, in your back line?
Yeah, I like Cumming. He gets a lot of uncontested ball, and I think he had 25 kicks, 4 handballs. So there's one I brought in this week, and he certainly lived up to the expectation. The only issue with him is he has a round 12 bye, so I don't have Dougherty, which sort of allowed me to get Cumming in, but it was a bit of a risky play. So I think that's the main reason why he's not being spoken about very much. He shares the same bye as a lot of other defenders, so you got to be really mindful of that. But I think he can keep this sort of scoring up, even when Whitfield was playing down back a bit in this game. He still seemed to be scoring all right, so that's not really too much of an issue. He had 35 touches, I want to say, last week and 29, so he gets plenty of the ball, which will mean he will score pretty well.
Yeah, and the other thing I like about Isaac Cumming is he's in 0.7% of sides, so he is definitely a point of difference down in the back line if you're looking for someone down there. I reckon he's probably the way to go, given that. What about Lockheed Whitfield? I just touched on him, but the last couple of weeks he's come good, sort of. He's still not scoring hundreds, but he's in the 90s now, which is probably a big improvement on where he has been. What would you do if you still had Lockheed Whitfield? Because I did have a look at his scoring, and he has done this. He's gone 2 weeks in the 90s, and then he's back down to a 50 again. So is this just what we're going to expect from Lockheed Whitfield, or do you think he's potentially maybe turned a corner and he can sort of get through to the buys when we can perhaps reassess him? What do you think?
I think his role has improved slightly. He was playing a bit more around the ball, and I saw him take a few kick-ins. So he's one where you hold for now. He's got the capacity of maybe going 90 plus for the rest of the year. And I think that at his price that he is now, that's a pretty okay deal. So he's one where I'd be keeping for now. He's got the history, the runs on the board. He doesn't look too injury hampered at the moment. So he's still covering a lot of ground, playing decent minutes on the ground as well. So I'll be holding for now. Yeah.
Yeah. What about Cooper Hamilton? So on the bubble this week, scored 55 last week. I think he scored 69 the week before. Hang on, I've only got defenders up. Hang on. So he scored. What was it? 68. So 68, 55. He's 102,000 midfielder forward. If you had the choice between, say, Rioli Jr., Carroll and Cooper Hamilton, which are probably the three players I think most people will look at bringing in this week, where would you sort of rank the three of them in terms of which ones to bring in?
If Carroll is playing with Hewitt in the team, I'd be having Carroll at number one because he was getting some centre bounce attendances. And if Hewitt's not named, I'd probably then be leaning towards Rioli, given he's scoring the last 2 weeks, and Hamilton at number 3. He's a pretty good option as a 102k player, but I'm not sure how much longer he gets in the team because it's a pretty strong outfit. Although they have been losing, but it's Liam Cameron, so I don't really trust it.
Yeah, and Cameron is known for pulling the wrath of SuperCoach players. Moving on to Geelong, what happened to Tom Stewart? Scored 187 last week, and I think everyone jumped on him at 607k, which I think I was quite surprised by that, given that I thought there were much better options. He's probably burnt all of those that brought him in last week. Only scored 74. I think his break even's back up sort of in the 110 mark, which is probably not ideal. No, in fact, it's 94. What do you think about Tom Stewart? Do you think that was just a game that didn't suit him, or what do you think about Tom Stewart?
Yeah, it was just one of those unlucky games where he gave away a few costly free kicks. The ball maybe wasn't down there as much, and that sort of held him back a bit, I suppose. He still had plenty of the ball with 23 touches. He just wasn't as efficient and effective with it. So no cause for concern, but if you're a non-owner, you're probably a bit relieved given the fact that you'll be able to get him at his starting price as $570 after his buy.
Yeah, and obviously, just going back to the Giants here, Braden Bruce just keeps scoring. So I think if you've got him, I think that's probably one of the trades of the year so far, especially if you say got rid of a Grundy or someone like that for him. I think that's probably a trade of the year so far. Moving on to Saturday night, this was a bit of a surprise game. This one, with Essendon turning around pretty much a 5-goal deficit to win by 5 goals. I want to talk to you about Darcy Parish. So this is someone who I think you've got in your side. You've had him in since round 1. Scored 139, which I think is sort of the Parish that we know and love. I did notice that a lot of the commentators were quite happy that Essendon seemed to be moving the ball forward a bit quicker, like they weren't going sideways. If they play like this, do you think Parish all of a sudden becomes a option in your midfield?
Yeah, I think I saw an interesting stat today. He's actually the highest possession getter out of all AFL players. So he loves to touch the ball. Ideally, he is a bit more effective and has more of a kick to handball ratio, but he's quite consistent. The last 5 weeks, he hasn't gone under 110. Merritt's return helps him, I think, because they share the ball a lot. And I think his tackle numbers have been down this year, but last week he had 7 tackles. So if he can keep that aggression up, and if Essendon can start to slowly string together some wins, he's going to average at least 115 for the rest of the year. So he's certainly in top 8 contention, and I couldn't argue against you if you were to bring him in this week, because yeah, he's got the ceiling and his floor isn't too bad either. I think his lowest score is 97. So when you're picking a player who's not receiving a heap of attention, he's getting a lot of the ball, who's gone over 110 the last 5 weeks, you can't really complain. He's pretty consistent.
Yeah, the other thing I like about him too is only in 8% of sides, so he's a little bit of a point of difference in that midfield for your sides as well. What about Nick Munn? So as we said earlier, he wasn't even on the list in January, and now he's probably been just about Essendon's best players so far this season, outside of maybe Parish and Peter Wright. What are you considering doing with Nick Martin? Are you actually even considering keeping him as a keeper at this stage, given how well he's scoring? Well, what are you going to do with him?
I think he's scoring that well that you don't have to worry about him for the time being. He obviously, this is his first year, so I'm not sure he keeps the momentum going the whole year, but he's one you rise through the buys and then assess if his scoring has slightly dipped or not. And if it hasn't, great, you hold on to him. And if it has a bit, that's fine as well. He's made so much money that you can then almost sideways him to a fall in premium. So I think he's one where you just enjoy the ride. He's been such a great rookie, probably the best rookie of the year, actually. So sit back and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go along with that too. Obviously, I've picked him up, and yeah, he's just, ever since that first game when I think he had 27, he kicked 5 goals or whatever it was. I think Essendon have got a seriously good player on their hands here. Just trying to think. What about Jai Caldwell, who's sort of a bit of an awkward price? I think he's sort of around the 350k mark. 386. What are we doing with Jai Caldwell? Because I think you're an owner of him, Jones. What are you doing with Caldwell?
It's a tough question because he almost turned the corner in the sense that he was getting a few more centre bounces, kicked the goal, but he's still only getting the 20 touches, so I'm not too afraid to get rid of him at the moment. He's got a lowish break even in the 60s, so you can certainly hold. I certainly did this week because he had the favourable matchup and he delivered. But yeah, if you're throwing up between trading out Caldwell and Butters, I'd rather go in hindsight and having another look at it. Initially, Butters was out as a rage trade, but he still has top 6 potential. And he's coming up against North Melbourne, whereas Caldwell, whilst he might get forward status in round 12, I don't want to bank on that, and I don't think he's a top 6 forward either. So I think he's one you can start to move on.
Yeah, and what about, I'm just moving over to the Hawthorn now, what about James Sicily? So I know a lot of people had question marks about him at the start of the year, but he has just been sensational for those of us who took the punt on him. Is it too late to get him in, given that right now I think he's currently the second highest scoring defender? I think only Sam Dougherty's ahead of him for total points. What would you do if you didn't have Sicily, given he's essentially 570,000? His break even, I think, is in the below 100, it's 84. What would you do if you were sort of tossing up between one of these more expensive defenders? Do you think Sicily's your go, or do you think he's a bit too much now?
I think you've almost missed the boat on him because so many people have gotten him at a cheaper price that I'd rather now just bet against Sicily continuing this form and getting in someone else. There are a fair few other good defenders if you're hunting for someone at around that price. You can even pick Brayshaw in the midfield at the same price, and I know who I'd be backing to score more given the role for the rest of the year. So he's one where he's scoring amazing, but I think you're almost chasing points in the sense that he's gone up in price 120k, and I don't think he's going to keep this exact average up. So you can certainly do worse, but I think it's like the Stewart situation of last week where you're picking him, and if he pumps out a 75, 80, he's going to fall a fair bit in price, and then it's a failed trade-in.
Yep, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I started with Sicily, so I'm glad that I started with him in hindsight. I probably picked him ahead of George Hewitt, which, I mean, I think Hewitt's been good, but obviously he hasn't played the last couple of weeks, which I think's hurt a lot of people. What about Dylan Moore? So we've spoken about this guy a few times on our podcast as being a top 6 forward. He only got 72 on the weekend, and I think, to be honest, I think you might have put the mods on him last week here, Jonas, because I think you sort of went after him a bit last week. Is this vindication, or do you think this is just an off game?
Yeah, I think it's slightly off game. He only had a few contested possessions. I think he'll bounce back. But as I was saying, he's like a small forward who's pinch hitting in the mid. That's not sustainable for a top 6 player. So it's you sort of get what you deserve in that sense if you picked him up, because you can't not expect a poor score or two because of the role he really plays, to be honest. So yeah, one where you just pass, and if you rolled the dice and get him in and brought him in, you pray that he reignites that form that he had in the first quarter of the season.
Yep, I think that's probably pretty good. What about Josh Ward and Connor McDonald? So 2 rookies who probably most of us have had at some stage. If you still got these guys, what would you be doing with them? Would you be looking at keeping them, or do you think their time's up in our sides?
If you can use them in your trade plans to get up to a premium, I wouldn't be afraid to trade them out, because neither of them has shown any form of real ceiling. But in saying that, they've got decent job security. McDonald will probably be managed this week. And whilst that's good in the sense that he provides a loophole, he's playing in the second game, so it means you can only loop players in the Collingwood Bulldogs game. So unless you've got a McRae or a Tim English or the like, Dunkley, yeah, you could look at that. Otherwise, yeah, I'd be trading them out. If they're in part of your if they're your pathway to a good premium.
And what about Tom Mitchell? So only 40 points. He's only have 14 disposals. This guy was a 600k plus midfielder at the start of the year. He's now only 520 odd k, I think, 526k. His break even's 189, so he's going to fall below 500k after this week. What's happened to him? Like, he's so consistent the last few seasons, and this season he's just fallen off a cliff. So what do we think about Tom Mitchell? Can he turn it around? And if he can turn it around, is he someone who you would go near, or is he just a very, very hard pass?
Oh, he's a hard pass, given his role. He's playing too much forward time. Sam Mitchell is giving the younger players a bit more mid time. And with that, I think Mitchell just becomes an invalid option purely because of his role. So he'll be taking up a precious mid spot. And if you're scoring 40, I don't care if he goes 100 plus next week and is a good price. I don't want to be picking midfielders in my top 8 who have the floor that Tom Mitchell has shown this year. So hard pass.
I will say he did do this last year, actually. He sort of had a bit of a quiet start. He had some low scores. He had a sort of a 70 and 80. And then after the bye, he didn't score below 100 for the rest of the season. So he does seem like, even in his Brownlow year, I'm not trying to defend him here, but even in his Brownlow year, he had 3 scores below 100 before his bye. And then after his bye, he only had 1 score below 100 after his bye. So he is a slow starter, but yeah, I think he's fallen too far down the pecking order to probably be considered. But if he can turn it around, he's a very good price for us. So moving on to the Brisbane West Coast game, which I think wasn't as much of a massacre as some people were perhaps saying. So Dane Zorko and Lachie Neale. I want to talk to you about Dane Zorko. So defensive midfielder, I think he's at a good price this week. I think he's about 522. If you were perhaps scratching around for someone in your back line, who's perhaps a little bit cheaper than these, say, Bailey Dales or Sicily's or Dougherty's, is he a potential option given that his role, he seems to be playing more in the front half now that Coleman's back in that side? What do you think about Zorko? Obviously proven scorer. What do you think about him?
Oh, I don't know. He has ongoing Achilles problems and he's only a year older. Is one where I'd avoid if you can, but if you're looking for a point of difference and say you're in the top 1,000 and you need someone to give you a quick, high, short-term benefit, he'll probably provide that. But in saying that, at any stage, he could get managed or rested or injure himself and cost you your rank. So it's one of those things where do you want to take that risk and potentially enjoy the short-term reward? Because I don't think you'll keep it up for the whole year in that role. Or would you rather play it a bit safer and get in someone who's shown no durability issues and will probably maintain their sort of form of scoring? And I'd rather lean to the safer route with this one. If I'm going to go risky, I'd rather do it with someone like Sean Darcy who can score 180 in a given week and completely pulverize non-owners. So I don't think Zorko will be doing that. So I'm not.
No, and it did, and let's not forget, he did have a 26 in round 1. I'm not sure if that was injury affected or not, but I think for those of you who started with him, I think that's probably going to live long in the memory bank. What about Cam Rayner? So obviously I think he was touted as being a bit of a potential sort of cheaper or maybe a bit more expensive rookie in the forward line. His season's been really good from a Brisbane perspective, but from a SuperCoach perspective, he hasn't actually translated into that scoring. What would you do if you had Cam Rayner, given he's sort of at an awkward price? And yeah, he seems to be in games but not scoring, SuperCoach wise.
If you still have him, I'd be surprised given how poor he's been. I don't think I see that changing anytime soon. He might improve a bit as the year goes on and he gets more games under his belt, but he's not going to be a premium. And if you're looking for a premium this week, which you should be, he's definitely a good avenue to do that because he's shown no real glimpses of any sort of scoring ability this year. So I'd be trading him out.
Yeah, and obviously, what about Hugh McCluggage? So high score in the game, 154. Do you think he's an option in the midfield, or do you think he's a bit too inconsistent?
I don't see him being top 8. He beat up on a West Coast Eagles outfit, so I wouldn't be going there. It's a bit like point chasing once again because West Coast is such a weak team. He's certainly very classy and a smooth player, and he had a good start to last year, but he fell off the cliff in the second half of the year, so he's got his question marks again. So definitely not a top 8 mid, so I wouldn't be going there.
And obviously, we're not going to touch on Lockie Neal because he's just obliterating everyone. I think he's probably just about I think he's probably just about the favourite in the Brownlow at the minute, if he's not already the favourite. We'll jump across to West Coast. So Shannon Hearn turned the clock back a bit with his 129. I think this is probably a very easy pass if you're considering him, given his age, and I think he's probably going to get rested at some points. Is that probably a similar line you're thinking of?
Yeah, don't go Hearn. Don't pick McGovern. Florenka could be a good option, but he's a top-up player and isn't even in the SuperCoach system, so unfortunately we can't pick him at the moment. And that's about all when it comes to relevancy with the West Coast lists.
Yep, I think that's the same thing. So obviously they're just so heavily destroyed by COVID and injury at the minute. Moving on to the Melbourne St Kilda game. Obviously, I was very disappointed with St Kilda. I had them as a bit of a smoky in this game, and they let everyone down who backed them in. But I think it just shows how good Melbourne are. And I want to talk to you about Oliver, Langdon, and Petrarca, and maybe I might throw Brayshaw as well. So pretty much for the top 5 scorers. Is there any stopping these guys, and could we potentially have all 4 of these guys in our sides at some point? And obviously, if you've got Max Gord, what do you think about the 4 of them? I know I have one of them. I've got Oliver, but could you potentially make a case to have all 4 of them at some point later in the season?
Definitely not Langdon. He's mid only. And he's not going to even be a top 20 pick, so you're wasting your time there. Brayshaw is defender mid eligible, so
yeah,
that's slightly more tempting. But if you look at his scoring, he's already gone under 105 times this year and has been sort of carried by his 176 in round 3 against Essendon. So once again, probably not someone I'd look at getting in, but probably a better option than Langdon. Petrarca, not a top 8 mid, probably closer to top 10, given the fact that his disposal efficiency is quite ordinary. Like, he has 36 touches, hits the scoreboard twice, and barely scrapes 100. That sort of shows why he's probably not the best option. Oliver is a standout option, but you should have probably picked him up at 620 when you had the opportunity. You can still probably get him, but he's one where you're not getting any value off at the moment. So I think that's the only one I really want to end my team with. But Petrarca's got a high ceiling, as we know, and is at a decent price, so I'd potentially entertain that pick. But I wouldn't be expecting him to be a top line midfielder come end of the year, given the fact that after his first few weeks, he hasn't really scored too impressively. So, yeah, I'd probably pass on all those. And then on the Melbourne side with the ruckman, I think Gawn is a slight concern given the fact he got a bit injured, but he's touch and go for this week, which makes zero sense. Like, just rule him out already because he's playing West Coast. You don't even need him up there to travel to Perth if he's got any sort of injury concern. So I think Melbourne will probably rest him, which may mean more ruck time for Luke Jackson. And
Gordon. What about the captaincy on him? If Gordon's not picked, would you consider chucking the captaincy on Luke Jackson, given he's going to be playing, I don't know what he's playing, his 20th game. He's probably going to be rucking against a Stranatica or someone like that. Or could you consider chucking a captaincy on him and hope he does a grand final and pulls out like a 150 game?
Certainly an option, but I think I'd be happy with a 150 and him not being my captain. That would be enough for me. I don't want to run the risk captaining a player who scored a 55 in 80% of a game, so probably not. But hopefully, for my sake, Gorn misses this week.
Yeah, and obviously I was one of the smart ones who did get Oliver when he was 618k. I've enjoyed his score in the last couple of weeks. So I think that's definitely a win trade there. Moving across to St Kilda, so Jack Sinclair, which is a guy that I know Thomas, obviously our St Kilda expert, he's not here tonight. But I know he's been really big on Jack Sinclair, and his role has been really good this year, but only got 83 on the weekend, which is a bit down on where he has been. What do you still think Jack Sinclair is a good option to get in? Or have you got some question marks now about him?
I've got a few question marks about him. I don't know why he's scoring so poorly. I haven't been paying too much attention to St Kilda, but given the fact he's got the first bye, you wait on him, see what his role and how his scoring progresses, and go accordingly. But I wouldn't be trading in any players who have the round 12 bye now because they're going to be missed soon. So
is this Jack Steele as well? So if you haven't got Jack Steele, obviously only scored 75, which was probably more reflective of how dominant Melbourne were. So is he in the same boat now as Sinclair? You just wait on him, given he's probably going to start falling in price?
Yeah, for sure. He's got a high break even and the poor buy, so he's a perfect trade-in target for round 13.
Yeah, he's 175 break even this week, so he's probably going to fall below 500k. I mean, below 600k. In fact, he's projected to be at 598 after round 10, which probably isn't ideal given it's just before his bye. But if I'll throw this question to you. So if Jack Steele says at 595, his break evens say in the 80s, would you consider bringing him in at that price, given he's got a buy in 2 weeks, or do you just pay the extra and just wait for his buy?
Pay the extra and wait for the buy, given the fact that a lot of people will be struggling in that round 12 buy with a ton of defenders missing. So I think, I'd be waiting.
So moving on to the last game. So we've got we won't touch on Patrick Cripps because he's just about the best player alongside Lockie Neal in the comp at the minute. So Charlie Curnow, so 149 on the weekend, 6 goals, 3. Probably should have kicked 7 or 8. I think he missed a couple of real sitters. Obviously started off the year at like in the low 200,000 mark, 224k. Been a really good starting player if you did go down that path. What do you think about Curnow as being a keeper? Or do you think he's someone you got to look at getting rid of sort of soonish?
If you have him still, well done. He's definitely not a keeper, but I'd be riding that 149 is his break-even system for the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Break-even's 1.
Yeah, so just keep him in your side, let him make another 50 or so K, and then trade him out because he's not going to be scoring 100 each week. So.
And what about Sam Dougherty? Just keeps getting the job done. Another 115, 30 disposals. Is he starting to cement himself as being the number 1 defender this season? Or do you think that there's potentially someone else who might lay claim to that number 1 spot?
On average, he certainly probably will, but with the lack of pre-season, is that scoring going to dip? Potentially, and I'd rather be picking a Stewart when he falls in price, just given the consistency. Certainly not a bad option, but once again, you're not trading him in this week because he's got the round 12 bye, so rules him immediately.
And what about Jack Carroll? We've already spoken about him, but is he going to make his way into your side this week, or have you already got him, Jonas?
Yeah, I've already got him. I think he's a pretty solid option. Bit scared about Hewitt because he sort of took Hewitt's role. Had a few CBAs, but he looked pretty good given the poor start he had to the game. I'm just glad he scored well enough to possibly hold his spot. I think he should, with Jack Martin injured as well. So I think he's a good option. I'd probably still have Rioli above him, given the fact that I don't think there are too many people vying for his spot, and he's got 2 good scores already under his belt. But if you're looking for 2 downgrade options, you can certainly do worse than Carroll.
I think the only problem I've got with Carroll is I'm just worried they might give him the vest, like the substitute vest one game. Because he's probably that type of player who probably could do well with the vest gear, and he's a younger kid. He's probably got a lot of energy. So if they need a spark, he might be someone to do that. Moving on to Adelaide, I'm very, very disappointed to see that Jordan Dawson is at the top. Your love child here, Jonas, 134. Somehow he got a goal on the weekend. Have we said enough about Dawson? What do you think about someone who's potentially looking at him? Would you be going down that path, or do you think you've learnt your lesson and perhaps a bit more consistent defender?
With Hinge coming into the side, it sort of helped Dawson play a bit higher up the ground and closer to the stoppages and the wings and get a bit more of the ball. And if that role persists at his price of around 520k with a favourable buy, I think he's a very, very good option. Maybe not top 6, but definitely top 10. And at 520k, as I said, I think that's definitely good value. He takes marks. He's a obviously an excellent kick. The Adelaide teammates, they look for him. He gets a few kick-ins as well, so he has a lot of avenues to scoring, and he's also just a fun player to watch. So I think there are a lot of benefits to Dawson, and probably one of the best defenders you can trade in this week.
I think you've had a good price. What about Ben Keys? A bit of a point of difference here in the midfield. I know he's someone who I think you've perhaps kept your eye on. What do you think about him? He's only scored 100 on the weekend. He's still number 8 for points overall. Do you think he's an option, or have you still got your question marks over his disposal?
Yeah, he's one of 2 players alongside Neil who have gone 100 plus in every game. So that's certainly impressive. But yeah, he's sort of fallen away a tad with his disposal. He's a bit like the Petrarca mold, where he'll get the contested ball, but he won't use it very effectively, and that will sort of cap his scoring a bit. So he's one where he's priced at his fair value. You're not getting any good price off picking him, and for that reason, I wouldn't be going near him. Maybe not. No, that's a bit harsh. I wouldn't be picking him this week because whilst he has a good buy, he's not a guaranteed top 8 midfielder. I almost prefer Rory Laird, and yeah, so those are my reasons as to why I wouldn't be picking Keys this week. You can get Brayshaw for 25k cheaper, who I think will outscore him in the long term. We haven't really seen too much history of Keys scoring very well. So whilst he's a great player and he's started the year well, he's probably more closer to that top 10 midfield mark. And so at close to 600k, similar to Boak, you don't want to be paying that much for a player you're not guaranteed to have top 8 output from the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. Please keep your eye out for the Q&A, which I think we're going to put out probably on Tuesday or Wednesday. I think we're probably going to record that either Wednesday or Thursday. So keep your eye out for that on our Twitter and wherever else we post it. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed the podcast, and we'll see you for the next one.